So Plato left us with this kind of sense, and again, I'm just going to keep harping on this, that either we can know the good or we can't. I just can't stress that enough. This is all Plato really wants to know. I'm in the camp that says when all is said and done, I think Plato says you really can't know. In fact, what Plato argues is, since there's no way to really know the good, what we should do is called the noble lie. Tell them whatever the hell we want to tell them. This is that cave analogy, right? If you think you know, but you can't explain what you know, then you are the problem, not the cure. Right? And this is Plato saying, when push comes to shove, I don't know if we can know. And therefore, we should just tell whatever story is best, the kind of sense of this for us. And this is really what Aristotle can bring to bear. So what Plato's saying is, the lie we tell isn't necessarily true, but of all the possibilities, it's best for us. Now, of course, as I hope you can see, that's what's best for one group might be shitty for another group, right? And so this kind of best for us becomes really problematic. And Aristotle kind of jumps on this. So just to kind of show you the reading. So this first reading, again, like always, is kind of an introduction to the thought. It just talks about how Aristotle studied with Plato, which he did. He studied for Plato for 20 years, right? They were friends. Although Aristotle says things like, even though Plato was a friend, we have to put truth above friendship. So they get this kind of sense, this interesting move that Aristotle's making. Aristotle's not from Athens. It's very clear. He's from Macedonia. His dad's a physician. He's basically raised in what will come to be called an empirical way of being in the world. You know things based on experience. And you can know things based on experience. This is where Aristotle and Plato really part. Is Aristotle says you can know things. We can know things. Those things we know may not be absolute, right? But we know them in terms of our existence. Again, the sense of for us, which I'll talk about in a sec. Anyway, so that's just kind of what's going on there. The more interesting reading, and the one I'm more interested in, is of course from Aristotle's Ethics. And there it is. So it's Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Here you go. A couple things about the Nicomachean Ethics. This is not written by Aristotle. Well, it is and it isn't. These are actually notes from his students, which tells us a couple of interesting things. One, that students take damn good notes, right? Basically word for word. So a different world order, right? But education was different back then. Also, that Aristotle was more of a teacher than a writer. Plato seems to be more of a writer than a teacher, in a weird sort of sense. Aristotle, had lecture notes and things, and he wrote some stuff. He did, and some stuff we've lost. Again, because the Christians hated Aristotle. We'll see why. Yeah, so he's just an interesting cat. But this is the most famous, Nicomachean Ethics. It's named after his son, Nicomacheus. That's what the idea is. There's another ethics, but we're not going to get into that too much. But we are going to talk about this one. And that's what you're reading here. So let's just go ahead and dive in. So here's what it says, very first section, number 1, first line, the same in this one. Every art, and I said I was going to tell you this. So he says, every art, which is techne. So this is the Greek. This is an E. Techne, wait a minute. What is techne, what's that the root of? What word do we use now?
Technology.
Technology. Is technology an art? When I said what's art, no one said technology, which is fascinatingly strange. That said, techne basically meant human skill. So anything a human does is a techne. Farming is a technique. Making statues is a technique. Making music is a technique. Building a building is a technique. Running the government is a technique. Basically, anything a human does is an art. And there's a sense in which what the Greeks are doing here, I'll show you this, is that in this ancient beginning, everything a human does is artistic. Which I think is kind of an interesting phenomenon to wrap our heads around, right? The sense that the Greeks saw the humans as an artistic being, unlike the beasts, right, and the barbarians. It's another reason the Greeks think the people living in roaming tribes are not that civilized because they don't have a lot of art. Does it make sense? their only techne is hunting, in a weird sort of sense, right? They don't do paintings, they don't make statues, they don't build acropolises, all these kind of things, right? So there's this kind of sense that they're closer to the beast than they are to the civilized. All right, this is kind of what's going on here. So Aristotle says, every art and every inquiry, and similarly every action and pursuit, is thought to aim at some good. And for this reason, the good has rightly been declared to be that at which all things aim. So right out the gate, Aristotle says, everything we do aims at some good. Everything we do aims at some good. But let's think about what he's saying here. And this goes back to that quote I had. The person who robs from somebody, are they aiming at some good? Yeah.
They're aiming to have valuables.
Well, who knows what they're aiming at, right? The point is simply that whatever they're aiming at, they believe to be good. Does that make sense? We're going to see this come back around. The idea of stealing bread to feed a starving child. How many people think that's okay? Oh, so you're okay with stealing then?
Purpose. For the right purpose.
For the right. Now, see, but that's what Aristotle's saying. It's easy to say it's okay to steal. It's much harder to say when it's okay to steal. When it's right? This kind of stuff. We'll see Kant ultimately say, no, it's never okay. But we'll get to that. He's the extension of the Stoics in a very real sense. So for Aristotle, he just simply says, everything we do aims at some good. Can you be wrong about that? Can you be wrong about the good?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and that's Aristotle's claim, right? Now, let's be very clear about something. He also says, we are cut off from the good. The good is basically known by the gods, if it's known by anybody, and maybe there's some trickle down that the philosopher gets some insight into. But the bottom line is, we do not participate in the good. We are cut off from the good. We participate in the polis, which is ultimately best for us. So the polis is what's best for us. The claim simply being that it's better to live in a polis than it is to live in phusis. And again, I want to be careful here because it's not a dichotomy like we have today. This kind of claim that Aristotle is making is where we're, in a lot of ways, I'm going to remind us, this is basically the world we live in. Aristotle's world is the world we live in. We don't live in Plato's world, although it's coming back around, you could argue. Now, one of the reasons Christianity is going to come to not like what Aristotle says is because of this claim here. He's basically saying, in a very real sense, we're cut off from the gods too. Right? So you already can start to see where, because Plato kind of gives you the sense that, like I said, we get trickle down kind of relationship to the gods. So we can participate in a sense. Aristotle says, no, you can't. You're just not a god and you suck it. Right? And why should the gods care about you? They're immortal, you're not. They don't really care, the god. And I can't stress enough, the Greek gods don't care about the humans. Right? Why did the Greek gods create humans, actually? From dirt, which they did. Anybody know? Why do you think the gods created humans? Guess. Yeah, boredom. Right? Bored. Let's create humans, have something fun to do. Right? We can manipulate them. Go down and have sex with their women. All that. And Plato points that out. Plato goes, interesting that you respect the gods since they go around raping your wives and stuff. Hey, let's not get hung up on, facts. Let's give alternative facts and say God is good. Wait, what? So Aristotle cuts us off from this. And he basically says, let's get to this. Keeping the good, because the good never goes away. Aristotle says, look, we're cut off from the good. But we do have, and I'm playing fast and loose here, and I get in a lot of trouble from philosophers for doing this. But, Noose. So what am I going to put? I'll put pathos here. Praxis. Actually, So what I'm doing here is hard because this is not a direct kind of link. Okay, all Greek terms. Pathos, root term for pathological. What do you think pathos means? Guess. Yeah.
To do with the brain or the mind.
No, that's nous. Since you said it, I'll just go ahead and say it. So nous is mind. That's what nous means. So no, it's not mind. Yeah.
Does it have to do with emotions?
It does have to do with emotions. Basically, and all these, let's be very clear. When you're talking about Greek translations, I'm giving you the simplest term, right? There's nothing is simple in Greek. I mean, everything has multiple meanings, blah, 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 how it's used, its declensions, all that. But basically, moods, feelings. Right? So, and Aristotle's kind of looking at the world this way. He's saying, look, everybody starts out with, I mean, if I put Plato's line back up, right, so if I put the divided line up again, the realm of the shadows, that's the realm of the moods. Does that make sense? Basically, actually, the shadows and the images both exist as pathos, because it's not real, right? You feel it's real, you believe it's real, but it's not, right? And that's where knowledge and understanding come up, and that's where this term comes in, logos. I was always taught, and I always think this is the best way to say it, account is probably how the Greeks meant it. Give me an account. What does it mean to give an account of something?
Does it have to do with facts or?
Well, just give me an account.
Yeah, just give her say what you saw or like what you think it is, or what you.
Well, it has to be a little more than that, because that would be down here in the shadows, right? What's the difference between me saying that's a tree and somebody saying exactly what type of tree it is? Does it make sense? What's the difference there? What's making that difference? That account, that difference comes from the logos. What's that?
Is knowledge.
The logos is the condition for the possibility of knowledge. That's the way we would say it philosophically. You can have no knowledge without the logos. You can't have, it's not that there's no knowledge in the pathos, it's just that it's not clear when there is knowledge in the pathos. In the logos, that's where the knowledge begins, right? For Aristotle, this is for Aristotle. So there's this kind of movement. You start out as a child, everything's just feeling, there's no reason. Right? Anybody have children in here? Nobody has children in here? Damn, I think it's my first class ever with no any kids. Well, good, we can make fun of them then. Because they have no mind, right? They have no ability to deal. And this is where I'm playing fast and loose, because it's not really clear what's going on here. Mind, logos, when I build this hierarchy, I'm trying to do this hierarchy so that it mirrors kind of what Plato's doing, but it's much more complex than that's all I'm trying to say. Praxis, what does praxis mean? Another term that gets thrown around a lot these days. Obama claimed to be a pragmatist. What is a pragmatist?
Someone who's very practical.
Okay, so what does it mean to be practical?
Means we need to have straightforward solutions or have.
And give me an example of a straightforward solution.
If a plant's dying, so you water it.
And what's the pragmatism there?
From getting a dying plant to a living plant again.
Yeah, right. And you said water. Why do you water it? What we would say is you water it because it works. Praxis means what works, right? And this is another kind of a strange term for the Greeks. Because does it work because it's good? Or does it work because we like it? This is that kind of move that Aristotle is trying to get us to see. Aristotle is the essence of wanting to have his cake and eat it too, in a very real sense. He wants to argue that the good is real, that everything we do aims at the good. And he also wants to then temper that by saying, but very few people actually know what the good is. So this is kind of this very strange place Aristotle puts us in. So this movement that's going on here, what happens is this becomes kind of the driving force. I mean, this is what's really driving it, but we'll get back to that in a second. When Aristotle says, this polis is good for us, this is what he's saying. is that it works. Right? The polis works. It works for us. Does it work for the barbarians? Who gives a shit? And I cannot stress enough. This is Aristotle says, Aristotle's not giving us a absolute account of being. This kind of sense that the polis works for us, when Aristotle says that, he means the polis. He means Athens. He does not mean Sparta. In fact, Aristotle's on record saying, look, Sparta runs their country, their city is way different than we do. Right? I told you what they do. They take those babies and they go, that's an ugly cuss, and they drop them off the cliff. Whereas the Athenians don't hold that view, right? The Athenians think there's more to life than just brute force. Who's right? Aristotle says, fuck if I know. But I'll tell you, as far as in Athens, the view we're going to hold is this. Does that mean Sparta should hold that view? And he says, no. I mean, this is very much kind of the sense when in Rome, right? You follow the laws of the polis because those laws work for those people in that place. And it's not your place to go tell them they're wrong. Spreading democracy is good. Wait, what? Sorry. Yeah. So this is kind of what Aristotle's playing with. This is going to become his ethics. What works for us. But then we have to get back into the text and see what he's trying to say here. So, and just coming right off that same line I was just reading, he says, but a certain difference is found among ends. There's another great term. So, let's put it over here. So what is the anthropos is the human. What is the human's telos, which is end? What is the end of being, what is the point of being human?
Is it to civilize?
So to civilize, it's interesting you see this because this is something I've always struggled with and I haven't been able to find anything and nobody I've looked at seems to be able to help me with this one. In fact, most people, scholars say it's an interesting question. Are the barbarians human?
Yes.
Yeah, they are. Are the barbarians living the wrong life? That's that kind of interesting question. Does that make sense? Is it best for humans to be civilized? That's this kind of... Now, I'm not going to lie. I think if you get Aristotle against the wall, he says, oh, it's clearly better to be civilized. I mean, duh. But is he going to say that he knows that? No, right? Because again, he's trying to kind of show that just because it's best for us doesn't make it absolutely good. So you've got this tension here, right? Yeah.
Well, then for the barbarians, wouldn't their praxis be what they were doing? I mean, it's best for what they're doing for them.
And again, I think Aristotle will accept that. But that's not the question we're asking. The question we're asking is deeper than that is, but is it better to be civilized? Right? Just because it works for them. And again, I can't stress enough. Just because it works doesn't make it good. Right? And you can hear Aristotle with that. Clearly, it works to lie and cheat, but is that a good thing? Right? So we got to be kind of careful with this tension. That's why I had that quote up there, is because Aristotle says, well, it's got to work the right way. So what is the right way? That's that question, right? But Aristotle does something, because he says, look, I've got a way to do this. We don't have to be cut off completely. So let me just finish this quote here. But a certain difference is found among ends. Some are activities, so your goal is to be a football player, right, or something like that, or a builder, an architect, that's an activity. Others are products apart from the activities that produce them. Education, right? Theoretically, education you do that not because of what it produces, but because it's good in itself, right? So Aristotle have this kind of tension. That which is good in itself, and that's what's good for something else, right? Why do we study medicine? Remember, Aristotle's father is a doctor. Yeah.
We want to be able to help ourselves and others to prolong life.
So the telos of medicine is what? So what's the goal of medicine?
It works.
Huh?
The goal of medicine is to prolong life.
I think there'd be a little bit of debate there, but that's not the worst. Make life less painful, maybe, is another way to look at it. Because it's not good for the Greeks. Well, for Aristotle it is. So let me just kind of stop here. Aristotle does say that you cannot tell if somebody has lived a good life until they're dead. Because a good life is a complete life. And if you die young, that's tragic, right? That's the essence of tragedy. Dying young means you didn't get a chance to live a full life. Can you have been virtuous at 21? Aristotle says no. If you die at 21, you never were virtuous, because to be virtuous is to live a long life. If you die young, there's something in you that stopped you from. Does that make sense? It's kind of either you did something stupid or you just weren't that healthy or something like that, right? Something is limiting your existence, which means you're not as good as the person who lives to be 80. Which is this interesting phenomenon that I think we still haunts us to this day, I think. I've always accused Aristotle of this. I think Aristotle, to this day, we have this belief that living long is better than dying young. But the myth of Silenus is still out there. The myth of Silenus is another Greek story. Silenus was a wise man who basically could see, but didn't want to deal with the polis, so he lived out in the forest with the barbarians. They go out and catch him, and they demand to know what the meaning of existence is. And he says, best never been born at all. Second best is to die soon. But that's a different way of being in the world, right? There's a very different way of being in the world. This kind of sense that there's something more than mere existence. That for Aristotle, right, to be human, the human condition is to live as long as possible. And that claim transcends any particular belief. So he's basically making what's called an axiom. So on Wednesday I'll show you this little video, and Aristotle does a really good job of this. But his axiom about the human, let's get rid of Plato's divided line here. So this is another good term, axiom. An axiom is just a premise, right? A fundamental premise. His axiom is to be a human that lives well. Where should I put it up here? So here's the term of all terms. Eudaimonia. Great term. Eudaimonia. That's what the reading was talking about. I'll come back to that in a second, because I'm going to talk about the happiness thing. This is, for Aristotle, the telos of the human is eudaimonia. To be human is to flourish. That's what it means to be human. He's not saying Phusis doesn't flourish. Right? He's not saying that. In fact, if anything, Aristotle says, of course Phusis flourishes. Look at it. But how does Phusis flourish? Nature. Does nature need help? It just does, right? Now, within nature flourishing, where does the individual being stand? The individual squirrel. What does nature think about the individual squirrel? Go ahead.
It doesn't have a place for it. I mean, it's just part of the greater picture. Everything's part of it.
Well, it's got to have a place for it, right?
It has a place for it, but I mean, it's not, the individual squirrel's needs are important.
Yeah, right? The individual squirrel can suck it, right? Now, if he's the last squirrel, he becomes important. Maybe. What percentage of beings that live on this planet have gone extinct? Like 99% or something, like 98% I think is the number. 98% of the things that have lived on this planet have died. No longer exist anymore. And now we're in the new age of another mass extinction, in case you're not paying attention. Does Phusis care? No, all right. Nature's just nature. Dinosaurs, no dinosaurs, I don't care. Jesus riding on the back of a brontosaurus, great, knock yourself out, right? No one cares. But the human, and this I think is an interesting insight. The human, barbarians aside, and this is again why the Greeks kind of think the barbarians are somewhat strange, is that we don't seem to be able to thrive in Phusis on our own. Right? Like, we're back to the baby. Throw the baby in Phusis and he's done. Right? And I mean, other animals are that way too. Bears have to, they need some time to cultivate, right? A year or two. But nothing like the human, right? The human. When does the human finally become responsible? Never. Not the worst answer. When does a human become, at what age would you say a human is quote unquote self-sufficient?
18.
You say 18?
25, mid-25s, mid-20s.
Well, that's when they're most executive brain functioning. But are you telling me you're not? No wonder everybody lives in their parents till they're 25.
Wouldn't it depend on whether they had someone to teach them or not, or whether they had...
Well, I mean, even if you have something to teach, there's got to. Is a 6-year-old self-sufficient? I don't care. How wise a 6-year-old is. Is a 6-year-old self-sufficient? It can't defend itself, right? If you can't defend yourself, you're not self-sufficient. Fair enough. So, what age? You say 18. 15's always, every time I hear 15, I think of Dave Chappelle. What is 15 exactly? If you haven't seen that stand-up, you should. It's hilarious. And so this is kind of, 15. What's the traditional age in antiquity? And, I mean, not for the Greeks, because the Greeks, by the way, in case you want to know, the Greeks considered 18 to be the age when you were an adult. So that we didn't pick 18 out of the ether. 18's been around for a long time, so there's something interesting going on with that alone. But in like nomadic tribes, and still today, like in certain parts of the planet, what's the age?
12 or 13?
Yeah, around 12 or 13, right? That's usually kind of been the Greeks aside, civilization aside, that's always been kind of the age, right? 12 or 13. Now, today, does anybody think a 13-year-old is...
No.
Right? It was like, oh, no, wait, no, of course. Now, I say be careful, because I think the generation coming up behind you that are like 1 or 2 and 3 now, at 13 are going to be technological whiz kids, like nothing we've ever seen on this planet, right? So we'll see how things shift, but if that's enough, right? But anyway, so this is kind of the sense of, when one becomes self-sufficient is already at play in Aristotle. And for Aristotle, this idea that you can't say you're flourishing until you've lived a life where you're in charge, right? So if you die as a child, that's a sense of tragedy, right? It's just tragic. It's not moral, it's not immoral, it's just tragic. And I hope you can see how, Christianity kind of turns that a little bit and says, no, it has nothing to do with age per se. Anyway, so back to this kind of sense, this axiom that the telos of the human is to live well means that the human must live long. Like I said, I still think we still live under this banner, if you will, to this day. Everybody wants to live to be 100, right? I always ask this question, and I think this is always an interesting question, to kind of get a feel for where people are. Let's say that I have the power. I have all the power. And I can give you a choice. You live to be 100, but you can't do anything that's even remotely dangerous. So no eating meat, all right, we're going to make you a vegan or whatever. I mean, it's whatever. You're not going to have a lot of fun. But you're going to live to be 100. Or you can live to be 60 and do whatever the hell you want. Who chooses to live to 100? Nobody?
Not too 60.
What's that?
Not very big veggie person.
Yeah, the food thing was just kind of an example. I think there's way more crazier things, right? But anyway, I think it's interesting because Aristotle would think that's interesting. Aristotle would say, what do you think Aristotle would say to the fact that you would make that claim?
Why wouldn't you want to live
Be virtuous.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Aristotle would going to say you're putting your personal desires over the good, if that makes sense, right? Over the telos of the human. But again, how does Aristotle know that's the telos of the human? And that's the billion-dollar question. Did you want to say something?
I was going to ask, do you get a partner? Do you get somebody else that you get to live with? Or is it
Sure. I mean, you can have the normal relationships, right? Yeah, I mean, you can live to 100 with somebody. That's fine. Have one person, the only one. Yeah, I mean, wake up to the same person every day.
Well, you just said something about, how Aristotle would say, it'd be against the good or whatever like that, but if we can't reach the good, and we already know that based off of what they're saying, or, if we believe in what they're saying, then why not live to 60 and have a fun...
Well, we're going to address that question on Wednesday when we see how Aristotle creates the syllogism to show you exactly why X, Y, and Z follow. But we'll do it on Wednesday.